Okay, well, having corrected the typo on my alternate identity there so that it scans and spells correctly, and in the hope that at least our first four speakers are all with us, I can see a couple of them so far. Let me welcome you to tonight's rally of the Trade Unionist and Socialist colleagues. My name is David Ellis. I'm the national chair. And over the next 90 minutes, we hope to give you a flavour of the candidates and policies that TUSC will be fighting for on Thursday, May the 6th. This Thursday is a major set of elections. Everyone in England, Scotland and Wales will have at least one ballot paper. Some will have several. As around 180 councils in England, the Welsh Senedd, the Scottish Parliament, Great London Assembly, police and crime commissioners, city and regional mayors, plus all last year's postponed elections and by-elections. It'll be the first electoral test for Boris Johnson since becoming Prime Minister some 17 months ago, the first electoral test for Keir Starmer since becoming Labour leader some 13 months ago, and a chance for us to oppose Labour's sole strategy, it seems to me, of facing Tory cuts, not of opposition, but that of a managed decline. And it'll be the first opportunity for working class people more widely to pass judgment on the 14 months of COVID anti-austerity, which has been overlaid on a decade of wage freezes and local and national public service cuts. Now, in these elections on Thursday, TUSC will be a major minor party. We haven't got thousands of candidates that the establishment parties have, but we have got hundreds. In fact, we've got 330, our largest challenge for 6 years. And tonight we're going to hear from some of those candidates. Firstly, as many of you already know, TUSC is a coalition, it says on the tin, a coalition of 4 parts. And we're going to hear firstly from representatives of each of the 4 component parts of TUSC itself. And as for them, and as for all tonight's speakers, given that we have a tight schedule and the fact that they only have a few minutes each, I'm only going to allow myself very short introductions for each of the first and succeeding speakers. And after those first 4 speakers, we're going to show you our TUSC election broadcast, which is already up there on YouTube. And we hope after tonight, you will share it widely in the next couple of days. But just before I call our first speaker, it was announced a couple of hours ago, this afternoon, that Mick Lynch, the current Assistant General Secretary of the RMT, has won the election to replace Mick Cash as the new General Secretary of the RMT. And I just want to start tonight's meeting on behalf of TUSC by offering our congratulations to Mick and our commiserations to the unsuccessful candidates, and to say that we look forward to working with Mick in TUSC in the months and years ahead. And therefore it is appropriate that our first speaker tonight is, as I say, from one of our 4 component parts, that is the RMT itself, and it's Jared Wood, and Jared is a member of the RMT National Executive representing the London Transport Region. Jared.
Thanks very much, Dave. I think it's a sad reality that the first question that many people will be asking themselves in the run-up to the elections on Thursday is, frankly, which of the parties do I distrust the least? Which of the parties do I hate the least? Because there's a real crisis in British politics of there being no positive force that working class people can get behind and feel is going to make a real change. Of course, many will be motivated, quite understandably, quite rightly, with the feeling that we absolutely have to reject the Tories and get rid of the Tories at every opportunity. Just the last few weeks have shown, as if anyone needed reminding, what this party is all about. I found it quite incredible when they said on Radio 4 that that there was a £30,000 budget for renovating the Downing Street for the Prime Minister. I thought, well, what's that? 30,000 each time there's a change of Prime Minister or something? No, £30,000 a year is the allowance that the Prime Minister gets to decorate their flat. That is absolutely astonishing. These are people who tell us that on London Underground, where customer service assistant, which is the second grade up from the bottom, if you like, customer service assistant, grade 1, someone that works at Oxford Circus Station and deals with all sorts of passenger incidents, money and all the rest of it. Someone who works shifts around the clock, has to start work at 4 in the morning, finish work at 1:30 in the morning. They get £30,000 a year. And out of that, they've got to pay for their housing, they've got to pay for their food, they've got to pay for anything else that they need to pay out on their family, all their bills and the upkeep of their home on £30,000 a year. And that's what the Prime Minister gets for their allowance. And when it was put to one of the Tory ministers that really Boris should have been able to have coped with that, didn't really need to be putting the begging bowl out to Tory donors. Of course, it's not a begging bowl, it's a contract, isn't it? You know, you give us 200 grand to do our flat up and we'll make sure that we look after your business and your interests as we go forwards. But when it was put to a Tory minister that 30 grand maybe ought to be enough, her reply was, well, you can't expect the Prime Minister to live in a skip. So that's their outlook. If you've only got 30 grand to do your flat up, you're living in a skip. And yet they resent paying £30,000 a year to members of my union for doing crucial safety critical work in public transport. And that's without getting into the issue, because there are plenty of workers in Britain who aren't even fortunate enough to get the pay rates that we've managed to win on London Underground at the present time. What about a care worker earning minimum wage, being told that £30,000 isn't enough for the Prime Minister to do his flat up with? It's just, you know, it's just one thing. But it's absolutely, it's so illustrative of the degeneracy of the ruling elite in this country and of the Tory party. And then you've got the corruption during the COVID pandemic, the spectacle of Hancock, the health secretary, paying out public money during the coronavirus pandemic to a company where he and his sister are shareholders. How can that happen? If I did that, if I was giving out refunds at a tube station to my friends and family, I'd get the sack for that. If I gave a £10 refund to my dad who came through the station and it was discovered that that's what had happened, I would get the sack for that. And yet Hancock can hand out millions of pounds of taxpayers' money to a company that him and his sister part own. It's quite staggering. And so many people will be asking, what the hell can we do to get rid of the Tories? Their language might have changed. They might now be trying to talk to their red wall supporters. They might talk about levelling up and all the rest of it. But the realities are very clear: a pay freeze for 2 years for workers, and the regime of public sector cuts and privatisation will continue. And we can't stand by and let that happen. But what is the alternative? The Labour Party was created largely as a result of the efforts of people in the union that came before the RMT, the ASRS, the rail union in 1900, who moved the resolution to establish a Labour Party. And the idea was to establish a party that would confront the rich and powerful elite, that would try and fight against the dictatorship of a rich and powerful elite over working people, to try and change the laws that were stacked against working people, to stop them fighting for trade union rights and fighting for their own living standards. But what's the reality now? There's only a handful of people left now who represent Labour in elected positions who still see their role as fighting that rich elite and defending working people. What we've seen instead is Labour adopting the privatisation position of the Tories. We've seen Labour adopting the light touch on regulation of the city and the finances. We've seen Labour going along with low taxes. And of course, you know, we had the infamous statement of Mandelson all those years ago now that Labour should be intensely relaxed about people becoming stinking rich. And yet the flip side to that, the consequences of Labour taking that attitude has been to see cuts made year after year and local services decimated, local services that people absolutely rely on, whether that be social care, whether that be children's services, whether that be services for older people, whether that be sports facilities, right across the board. Those facilities have been slashed by Labour councils. In the last year, I read recently that Labour authorities have lost now a third of their spending power. A third of their spending power lost. And yet they say nothing. You hear nothing about it. They put up no resistance to it. Instead, by the way, they continue to increase the amount of reserves that they hold. Instead of using reserves to ameliorate the cuts, what they do is they make extra cuts to build up their reserves even more. That's the attitude that they've taken. So devoid of any idea that they can fight against these cuts and win are the Labour authorities around the country. Not one has actually refused to implement cuts that have been put forward by the Tory government. And so for many workers, they will look at the situation, they will hate the Tories, but they will question what on earth is the point in voting for Labour at this time. And yet others will say that voting for a party like TUSC is a wasted vote. Well, I'd ask anyone, what bigger waste of your vote is there than to give it to someone that you don't believe in, that you're convinced will sell you out, that you think that you have no trust in, and who puts forwards no programme for fighting on the things you need to fight on? What is the point of voting for candidates in that position? What's the point in voting for other parties, whether it be the Lib Dems or others, who sign up to the Tory ideology of privatisation and austerity and cuts? And the reality is that any small party has to start with from somewhere. But what we've seen, even in the context of Britain and our electoral system, there is the possibility for a party with a clear position, a clear strategy, a clear message for people to grow. And we've seen that, unfortunately, with UKIP, for example, who had a clear message about the question of Brexit, and were able to go from a completely fringe party getting 2-3% in elections to a party that was actually the biggest single party in the European elections at one stage. Of course, given that Britain is now no longer in the EU, their central rationale for existence has gone, and so with it, their party's gone. But it does show that if you have a clear message and you're prepared to confront the establishment parties, that you can do that, even in the British context. And so imagine if trade unions in Britain came together and put their weight behind a project like this, whether it be TUSC or something with another name that TUSC maybe could contribute to, whatever. If the British trade union movement put its resources behind the idea that we can fight the rich and powerful, that we can resist privatisation, that we can refuse to implement the cuts, that could trigger a massive movement in this country that would completely transform politics. I'll finish on. I'm not sure how long I've been speaking for, Dave. What have I got left?
You've got -4 minutes at the moment.
Oh, have I? Right. Well, I better stop then, hadn't I? But I'm going to finish on this point then. There was an article recently on the AstraZeneca COVID vaccine. 97% of the investment into that vaccine came from the public sector. The time to advance these arguments that the private sector is completely structurally incapable of responding to the interests of the mass of people in our society has never been stronger. We need to make those points. We need to make the points that privatisation is not the way forwards. Social ownership is the way forwards. Bringing workers together and fighting in the interest of workers is the way forwards. We've got a huge job in front of us, but the first step to winning an argument like that is to put the argument. And that's what TUSC is doing. And that's what I think we will get respect for from many workers at this stage. And it will lay the basis for a time when TUSC can become part of a mass force to transform politics in this country. Thanks very much, Dave.
Well, thanks very much, Jared, for the points that you were raising today. And as many people will be aware, not only was the Society of Railway Servants the former name many years ago of the RMT there at the founding of the Labour Party, but the RMT and Bob Crow in particular, its then General Secretary, was there at the founding of TUSC itself. And we do appreciate the continued involvement of the RMT and of Jared's contribution this evening. As I said, because of the very, very tight schedule, the opening speakers only have 7 minutes each, and later speakers, unfortunately, even less, in order to get a breadth of contributions into tonight. I'm only going to very briefly introduce each speaker, and that's no disrespect to them. But our second speaker is Hannah Sell. Hannah Sell is the General Secretary of the Socialist Party, and the Socialist Party was there in January 2010 alongside Bob Crow, the then General Secretary of the RMT, as one of the original founders of TUSC. Hannah, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Dave. Well, Jared's already referred to the fact that we found out in the papers over the weekend that Boris Johnson is in the same boat as lots of the rest of us because he's had to go on the cadge. And actually not just the cadge to do his flat up, but also to pay his childcare bills. Because apparently Boris Johnson needs £300,000 a year to live on and cannot possibly be expected to manage on a Prime Minister's salary of £157,000 a year. And it really does say it all. This sleazy, corrupt Tory government is interested in only two things: defending the interests of the capitalist elite in general and feathering their own nests. And yet, they're closing a little bit now, but if you look at the opinion polls, most polls are still showing the Tories ahead of Labour for the elections taking place in 2 days' time. And in our view, that is not because Johnson is popular. It is because of the absolute failure of Starmer and his new Labour cronies to offer any opposition to the Tories on the central issues. By the way, that's even true on the question of sleaze. It's already been referred to that Peter Mandelson under Tony Blair famously said that New Labour were intensely relaxed about people getting filthy rich. And he led from the front, because for those who remember, he had to stand down from the government because he was found to have taken an interest-free loan to buy his house from a man that his governmental department was in charge of investigating. And of course, this man is now back as an advisor to Starmer. He's there in reality to obliterate even the memory of Jeremy Corbyn's ideas within the Labour Party. And yet what a contrast between his money-grubbing approach and the approach of Jeremy Corbyn, who has consistently had amongst the lowest expenses of any MP in Parliament. What a contrast to the ex-MPs who are here tonight, including Dave Nellist, our chairperson, who has a militant supporter, now the Socialist Party, and an MP in the 1980s only took a worker's wage, giving the rest of the money back to the workers' movement and the community. And that is a pledge that all Socialist Party members make, standing for public office, including those standing in this election. Why does it matter? Because the Socialist Party, like all TUSC candidates, are standing not to feather our own interests, our own nests, or to represent the interests of big business, but to fight for working class people in the electoral elite arena. So while Labour hems and haws about health workers' pay and says maybe they deserve 2%, we stand full square behind health workers' demand for a 15% pay rise. While Labour considers abstaining on the undemocratic police and crime bill, we're helping to organise the demonstrations against it. And as Jared said, while Labour councillors cut services and hike council tax, our candidates pledge to oppose all cuts and to stand in the interests of working class communities. TUSC's name sums up what we are. We're a coalition that brings together organisations and individuals who want to fight for socialist policies at the ballot box. You'll hear from some of our candidates tonight. Trade unionists, people who've either left the Labour Party in disgust at Starmer or have been forced out as part of the witch hunts. Campaigners against the police and crime bill, Black Lives Matter activists, environmental activists, community campaigners. We're standing in these elections to offer an alternative. And we do understand, Jared referred to this, that there will be many who don't vote in these elections because they're disillusioned with all of the capitalist establishment politicians. And also because elections are not on their minds at the moment. They're consumed with the struggle to survive in the wake of the pandemic and everything that they and their families have suffered. But we say to every working class person, if you're one of the 6 million trying to survive on universal credit, the 2 million reliant on food banks, the 200,000 facing eviction, if your boss has tried to fire and rehire you to make you pay for the COVID crisis, the time is coming to fight back. The working class will not accept post-COVID austerity. We are going to see mass struggles, and the Tories know that. That's the real reason behind the police and crime bill. And the best way that you can aid those coming fight backs in 2 days' time is by voting for TUSC wherever you can at the ballot box. After the defeat of Corbynism, with big business once again having a reliable representative at the head of the Labour Party, we do understand that many people feel there's nothing we can do on the electoral field. There's no point. But let's be clear, while we cannot win via the ballot box alone, at the same time, our industrial action, our protests, our rent strikes are weaker if they don't have a political voice. And there is enormous potential support for left ideas at the ballot box. That's why big business was so frightened of Corbynism, because they got a hint of that in the 2017 election. And since then, the objective need for socialism has only grown. We've had the misery of the pandemic, the deepest economic crisis in 300 years. And at the same time, the Tories have shown they do have a magic money tree. After all, in 2020, the Tory government spent 3.5 times what was in Corbyn's 2019 manifesto. Of course, they didn't do it for the many. They did it for the few, including their own mates. But nonetheless, they showed that the money was there. That's what the Financial Times meant when they fretted that COVID could bring socialism on its coattails, that workers would think the money's there. Maybe the time has come to take it off the elite, to nationalise the major corporations and banks that dominate the economy, and to begin to build a new socialist society. That's what the Socialist Party is fighting for. And we would appeal to everyone listening tonight who agrees to join us. But we would also say, help to build TUSC. Convince your friends to vote for TUSC in this election and beyond. Let's be clear. This is not going to be a big enough challenge this time around to fundamentally have changed society when we wake up on Friday morning. We're still going to have a Tory government. We're still going to have cutting councils, Labour and Tory. But that doesn't mean that we make no difference. Look back at the history of the Labour Party when workers were first trying to create a political voice. You could probably say that one of their first significant successes was as a result of the 1906 general election, 1906, 1907, can't remember. But anyway, the Labour Representation Committee, as it was then, definitely didn't win that election. I think they got about 4.5% of the vote nationally. But that's not the point. They terrified the capitalist class. They terrified the incoming Labour government, Liberal government, who felt the hot breath of the working class on their necks and therefore were forced to repeal the anti-democratic, anti-trade union judgment, the Taft-Vale judgment that was on the statute books at that point in time. And we are aiming to begin to have a similar effect in this election, to make the cutters in Downing Street and the council chambers feel the hot breath of the working class on their necks and to frighten them a little bit. And the best way we can do that is build support for TUSC for the elections this coming Thursday.
Thanks very much, Hannah. That was a second excellent contribution this evening. And Jared and Hannah have both set out from their respective organisations how and why TUSC was brought together and how they see the future work that we should be doing. And I'm sure our final two speakers in this section of the evening will probably want to do the same. And our third speaker this evening is Chris Williamson. Chris is the former Labour MP for Derby North, who was disgracefully treated by the Labour machine and forced out of Parliament. Chris has founded a new organisation called Resist, a movement for a People's Party. And Resist has become involved with TUSC since about 6 months ago, October of last year. And like the Socialist Party, has a number of candidates as TUSC candidates in the elections on Thursday. So now we'd like to hand the floor over to Chris.
Well, thanks very much indeed, Dave, and it's good to be here. And I just want to echo the words of Hannah, really, when she talks about the Tories being well ahead in the opinion polls. It's not, as she said, down to the popularity of Boris Johnson. It is really the abject failure of Starmer's Labour. And I remember when Jeremy was leader and people like Starmer and the vast majority of the Parliamentary Labour Party were doing their level best to undermine him, to sabotage him, as were the bureaucrats who are supposed to be working for the Labour Party to work for Labour victories in local and general elections. They were likewise seeking to undermine him. And we were being told daily that, you know, it would only take a credible leader, so-called, to be heading the Labour Party, for the party to be 20 points ahead in the opinion polls. We're about 20, Labour's about 20 points behind now, and they've got their so-called credible leader, and he's simply not up to the job. The Labour Party's not up to the job. We frankly have two establishment major parties in this country, two sides of the same coin, and they're not really offering anything to the British people. And local government, you know, has been under attack for not just this last 11 years or so under austerity. Obviously, it has been brought into particular sharp focus then, but local government has been under attack for the last 40 years, really, starting with Margaret Thatcher, continued under John Major, and indeed under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. Yes, some additional monies were made available, but they certainly continued, and I was a councillor and council leader, in fact, undermined the role of local government, undermined their role in terms of actually starving them of the resources that they need. There were more resources put in, but the funding formula was never fit for purpose. And let's remember, Britain is the 5th biggest economy in the world. There is no reason on earth, frankly, why local government should be receiving the resources that it requires. There's no reason on earth, indeed, why anybody in this country should be living in poverty either. It's about political will. And under that period of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, you know, we saw the tick box mentality. We saw local government really being used as a delivery arm for central government. And you know, the days of municipal socialism were long gone. And Blair and Brown have a lot to answer for, really, because they hollowed out local government. I remember, again, back when I was in our earlier days in the Labour Party in the 70s and then into the 80s, that local government was a great bulwark against the Tories. I mean, just up the road from where I live in Clay Cross, the Clay Cross Rent Rebels, they were the pinnacle, really, of what, you know, municipal socialism should be all about. And then into the 1980s, places like Liverpool and Lambeth and indeed Derbyshire County Council, many local authorities really held out against Thatcherism. And those days are long gone. And there's the sort of spirit that we need to bring back. We need to bring politics back into our town halls up and down the country. And you kind of look at the failings of local government under the Tories and indeed under Labour. I mean, indeed, you just look at the council housing. The Tories actually built more council houses under Thatcher than Labour did under Blair and Brown. It's an absolute disgrace that that's the case. But that is the fact of the matter. And similarly, the Tories deregulated the private rented sector, and Labour did nothing to challenge that. 13 years of a Labour government did nothing to regulate the private rented sector again. I remember when I was first elected to Parliament back in 2010, and I think it was I think it was early 2011 actually, when Liam Byrne, who was the Shadow Secretary of State for Social Security, came to the Parliamentary Labour Party to argue for the Labour MPs to back the benefit cap. So in order to address a Tory policy failure and a Labour policy failure, by not actually building council houses, by not regulating the private rented sector, they wanted to penalise the victims of those policy failures. I mean, I railed against that at the Parliamentary Labour Party meeting. I'm pleased to say that the PLP on that occasion didn't actually go along with that. But the party didn't cover itself in glory. It went along for far too much with the Tory agenda, continued with the externalisation agenda under Blair and Brown. We had compulsory competitive tendering initially under Margaret Thatcher. Then we had so-called best value under Blair and Brown. And both of those were used, I mean, more explicitly under the CCT, but both of them were used as an excuse for externalisation. And so we've seen public services being used as a cash cow for the private sector. And one of the things I think that we should be absolutely arguing for is to bring services back in-house. It was Keir Hardie who said that profits should find their way into the public purse and be dispersed for the benefit of the public. Well, one of the good ways in which we could do that is to bring privatised services, privatised local government services, back into the public sector. And of course, over the last 11 years or so, we've seen Labour councils implementing austerity. I mean, our offer, the Labour Party keeps saying our, because it was a lot of for so many years, but the Labour Party's offer was to essentially say, vote for us and we'll manage the Tory cuts better than the Tories will. It's not good enough. People deserve better. We deserve better. And TUSC is offering better. I mean, under a TUSC manifesto, we've committed to building council houses, and the powers are there. The powers are available to local government now to actually build the houses that people need. Ironically, made possible by the Tories. They lifted the cap on the housing revenue account. So there is no real excuse now for local authorities. They say, well, they could be subject to the right to buy, but the first time to become eligible for a discounted right to buy is after 15 years for a house, and then it wouldn't be the full discount. And in that time, I think we should be arguing for an end to the right to buy. So I think around housing, TUSC candidates can be making that case, embarrassing Labour councils that are not actually building the houses when they have the power to do so. They can be using the reserves, which they have at their disposal. They've been built up huge reserves. Obviously, it would differ in different parts of the country, but they can be used. And there are redistributive council tax raising measures which can protect the vast majority and put the burden onto the shoulders of the better off. That is the way I think that we should be arguing local government should be used. An end to the cuts. And I think TUSC has the opportunity to raise the standard for municipal socialism in town halls again, up and down our country. It's long overdue. We desperately need it. And I wish all the luck in the world to the TUSC candidate standing in the election.
Well, thanks again, Chris. That was the third excellent contribution. And thanks for joining us this evening. I echo the points that Chris was making, that there is no reason why Labour councils could not be fundamentally making a difference. It is a question of political direction and of political leadership and what that is at the moment. Now, our final speaker in this opening section is Pete McLaren. As I've explained a couple of times, TUSC is a coalition of organisations, the RMT, the Socialist Party, and Resist. But there are individual socialists who aren't members of either of the two political parties, political organisations who are affiliated. And they have a section within TUSC of their own, and they are as welcome as well. They have a representative on the steering committee with the same veto that the organisations have, because TUSC is an organisation which moves forward by consensus. Pete is the representative of the individual socialists, the unaligned socialists on the steering committee, and Pete's going to address us now. Thanks, Pete.
Thank you, Dave. Comrades, sisters, brothers, can I first of all thank you for coming tonight. We've got nearly 400 people here, which is excellent. Once again, far more than we normally get, and we need to think carefully about the use of Zoom, because it clearly does reach out to places that ordinary public meetings and rallies don't seem to. Can I say also a great welcome to the candidates and agents who are here, and of course all of us who have done tremendous work over the last 3 weeks to build TUSC and to try and build TUSC's vote. The elections are important, not just for the votes that we get, of course, but also in terms of building TUSC as an organisation, as Hannah and Chris and Jared have already referred to. TUSC, in fact, is the first left project, the first socialist project that I've been involved with in 50 years of left politics to actually include independent socialists, individual members as part of its federal structure. And that's a tremendous step forward. And it shows that TUSC really has got something different and exciting to offer. I'm also the local group development officer for TUSC, and I do want to spend a small amount of time this evening just mentioning why local organisation is so crucial. But before I do that, I think it is important to continue the theme and to put these particular elections on Thursday into context. The fact that we've got 330 candidates standing in 90 different local authority areas means we will be the largest left challenge on Thursday, May the 6th. And that is not the first time that TUSC has been that. We had 135 general election candidates in 2015. And for some years now, TUSC has established itself as the main electoral voice on the left. And that will put us in a good stead when things do start to move our way, as they are beginning to do. Let me talk about the Labour Party briefly, because I don't want to repeat what's been said already. The fact that the Labour Party has become completely bankrupt is shown by the large numbers of members who have left in the last 12 to 15 months. In fact, since Starmer took the helm, estimated that over 100,000 have left. And increasing numbers of those are coming our way. As the individual members representative, I deal with new applications. And I can tell you, comrades, that we've had over nearly 300, 281, I think the latest count I worked out last night, of new applications for people who want to join TUSC, the majority of which are from former Labour Party members, because when I write to them welcoming them and they reply to say whether or not they classify as an individual member, as an independent socialist, they say a little bit about themselves quite often, and they increasingly are saying we are fed up with Labour and we're fed up with the move to the right. And who can blame people when Sir Keir Starmer, and that in itself I think says something, uses the Mail on Sunday of all papers to put forward Labour policies for stronger immigration controls, and those were his words, wrapped around the Union Jack. I mean, that's just for a so-called left of centre. I mean, I don't think socialist could be a word that could be used in the same sentence as Labour anymore, but for a so-called left of centre reforming party, that is an absolute disgrace. And of course, we know that not a single Labour council up and down the country will oppose this year's cuts. They haven't done for years and years, comrades. In fact, since the days of Lambeth and Liverpool, as Chris has just alluded to. Labour Party is finished in terms of socialism, and increasingly members will drift our way. And we need to be ready for them. And that's why I want to talk briefly about the need for local organisation, wearing my other hat. We have started to redevelop our local structures, and I've been delighted that during these elections, some 20 local or regional steering committees have been established, in addition to the half a dozen branches that we've got up and down the country. But really, we need a local TUSC group in every area that we're standing in. We need all 90 local authority areas. There needs to be a TUSC group, and that's what we should be aiming for in the long term. I believe we'll get there. It's not going to be easy. No one suggests that it's going to be easy, because it does mean that existing groups within TUSC will need to talk to others and maybe set up something in parallel to their own organisation. And I accept that that's going to be, we're going to need to think sensitively about how we do that. But the importance of inclusivity is such that we will work together as we have been doing. If I just give the example of how we set up a local group in TUSC 10 years ago, almost immediately after the start of TUSC, 3 of us met together, we were members of Rugby Against the Cuts, and most local areas have had anti-cuts groups in the last 10, 15 years. One was from the Socialist Party, one was from the SWP, and my good self as an independent socialist. From that, we were able to field 9 local candidates in my local borough of Rugby 3 months later. And we've not looked back since then in terms of organisation and campaigning and activity. Local groups, TUSC having a local structure is I think, the most significant way that TUSC can grow in the coming period. The reason for that is that it's much easier to get noticed at a local level than it is at a national level when you're fighting the main establishment parties. At local level, the media actually are interested in any political activity that's going on the ground. And once TUSC groups get going and campaign together as a group, as a united group, then they will present people with an alternative that the media will be interested in. In Rugby, for example, the media now come to us on both local and national issues if they want an alternative voice to the Tory MP, because they know that Labour won't give them anything of interest at all. A second reason for establishing a local TUSC group, preferably a branch, is that it enables individual members that I represent to have a say in the way that TUSC develops. Obviously, they can do that through myself and any other representatives that we have on the National Steering Committee. And as I said at the start, it's a magnificent bonus that independent socialists are represented on the TUSC Steering Committee. But it's sometimes easier to get involved and much better to get involved along with local comrades. And it does give independent socialists, and I would say those trade unionists whose trade union is not politically involved with TUSC, or at least isn't necessarily part of TUSC's national structure, to get involved with TUSC itself and to work together with us. In the short term, obviously this will take time, but in the longer term, we do need to be positive and to start learning ways of working together on a regular basis. I personally would prefer a monthly branch meeting type approach, which will need the Socialist Party to think very carefully as to about how they can contribute to do that. But I'm personally very positive that they will be able to find that way along with the rest of us. The fact that we are the largest left party on Thursday, comrades, will help us grow in itself. We are a stepping stone, Hannah, I think, made the point, towards that new Workers' Party that so many of us have been striving for a number of years now, for far too long, obviously, in my view. But we can develop TUSC, not just by the local measures that I've mentioned, but also at national level by expanding the steering committee to include not only additional trade union representation, as important as that is, but community activists, tenants groups, anti-racist groups like Black Lives Matter, who have made a tremendous contribution to the fight against racism in the recent period. And uniting the left together is part of the process of building a new Workers' Party, a new mass-based socialist party. I believe TUSC can be that stepping stone. I believe Thursday is another step towards that, comrades. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Pete. Well, I hope everyone who has been listening to the first 4 contributions, particularly if tonight was your first experience of a TUSC meeting, a TUSC rally, would agree that we've had 4 excellent contributions which showcase the range of the organisations and individuals who are involved in TUSC. But now we're going to do that in a slightly different way, because only once in the last 11 years that TUSC has been in existence have we had a TV broadcast. And that was, as Pete said, in 2015, when we had 135 parliamentary candidates in the general election. We also had 619 council candidates in that year. And TUSC was the 6th biggest party in Britain in electoral terms. And that TV broadcast is on YouTube. And if you get a chance to watch it, and if you can like our YouTube channel, subscribe to it, click on the notifications, then we would much appreciate it. But that's not stopped us, because tonight what we're going to show you is a 5-minute broadcast which we would have used if this year we'd had the chance of an electoral TV broadcast with some of our many candidates standing around the country. Again, if you like it after you've seen this broadcast, please go to YouTube, like it, and let others know, especially before Thursday. Here's the TUSC TV broadcast 2021.
From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home.
Morning, Mel.
Because I'm just so tired.
The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the great divide in society between the haves and the have-nots. We can't allow establishment politicians to make working class people pay the bill when billionaires across the world saw their wealth rise by 32% last year.
The way Boris Johnson's Tory government's handled the pandemic proves that they prioritise the interests of big business and their super rich friends over everyone else.
But where is the opposition from Starmer, Welsh Labour or the SNP?
It's clear we need a force to represent the millions, not the millionaires.
The Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition, or TUSC, does what it says on the tin. It's a coalition of those willing to build an anti-austerity opposition at the ballot box.
Our candidates are those who've been on the front line during the pandemic.
Fighting for COVID safety on public transport.
Organising collective action of school staff to stop the unsafe full reopening of schools in January.
Fighting for trade union action for a 15% pay rise for healthcare workers.
Protesting against racist police brutality as part of the Black Lives Matter movement.
Fighting cuts to domestic violence services and defending the right to protest.
When Jeremy Corbyn was Labour leader, he represented a threat to the capitalist elite because of the mass support for his anti-austerity policies.
If they chose to, local councils and mayoral authorities could improve the lives of millions of people and carry out whole parts of Corbyn's manifesto right now.
They could bring privatised services back under public ownership and control.
Reopen libraries, Sure Start centres and youth clubs.
Ensure above inflation pay rises for all local authority workers.
Ensure that all 2-, 3 and 4-year-olds are entitled to 30 hours of free preschool education each week.
Start a mass programme of high quality, environmentally friendly council housing.
And devolved governments in Wales and Scotland could do all this and more, including awarding a 15% pay rise to NHS workers.
For 10 years, the Tories and Blairites maintained the myth that cuts and austerity were necessary. But when the profits of big business were threatened by the pandemic, they showed that they're willing to spend untold billions to protect their rich friends.
This government is weak and divided.
Elected anti-austerity politicians outside of Parliament, standing up for working class people, choosing to use their existing powers to build council homes and resist austerity would win mass support, enough to force a U-turn and win the funding our communities need.
I was a parliamentary candidate for Labour in 2017 and 2019 when Jeremy Corbyn was leader, but I can no longer support the Labour Party under its current leadership. Starmer has ended any chance of Labour being a voice for ordinary people, and I am not willing to sacrifice my values and principles to try and fit in with the neoliberal establishment.
We need a new mass party to give a political voice to workers in struggle and make sure that we aren't made to pay for the crisis.
TUSC is a step towards creating that.
TUSC stands for a democratic socialist society to rationally plan our wealthy country in the interest of the millions, not the millionaires. That means putting the major companies and banks that dominate the economy into democratic public ownership. Production and services could then be planned to meet the needs of all while protecting the environment.
So, if you want to make sure it's the rich, not the working class, who pay for this crisis.
If you support Corbyn's policy and you want to create a mass party for the working class people.
If you are a trade unionist or a campaigner fighting to defend jobs and services in your area,
then vote for TUSC and help take the fight back to the ballot box.
Well, that's the broadcast that isn't, in the sense that it's not out on the TV, but it is up on YouTube. And hopefully my technical assistants, if they haven't already done so already, will make sure we have a link in the chat where you can go to that broadcast and share it amongst family and friends. And can I just say thank you to the last contributor in that broadcast? That was Katie Simpson in Northants, who was responsible for the editing and production and pulling the project together, along with Lenny Shale, who helped write the script. We've now got 3 contributions, because one of the themes of tonight's meeting is how COVID has disrupted lives and work over the past 13 or 14 months. And our next 3 speakers are going to reflect 3 areas of life that have been affected. In that video, you saw our first speaker, Holly Johnson, who's a nurse's pay advocate, an activist, and a candidate in Sheffield. And she's got the unenviable task in 3 minutes to tell us about the state of the NHS, the morale of NHS workers after a decade of pay cuts. Holly, the floor's yours.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So yeah, my name is Holly. I'm a ward sister, one of the lead organisers for NHS Workers Say No and NHS Pay 15 campaign, a union rep, member of the Sheffield Socialist Party and TUSC candidate for Sharon Netheredge in Sheffield. I just want to say a few words about the impact having a local TUSC councillor would have on NHS workers. So I'll just provide a brief background to our campaign firstly. NHS Workers Say No are a grassroots organisation that have been campaigning for a 15% pay restoration after seeing up to 20% pay cuts in real terms over the last decade. We have made clear the links between staffing and safety and the ways in which our workforce have been deliberately destroyed. We have successfully lobbied 2 health unions and encouraged others to fight for a meaningful pay rise. We see the situation as critical and are doing everything we can to fight for the future and investment of our NHS, the workers in it, and for the safety of our patients. As a frontline nurse in the NHS and throughout my career of 17 years, I've realised that it was not exclusively under the Tory government that privatisation and underfunding of the NHS was happening. We could see bed numbers in hospitals dwindling, which have more than halved in the past 30 years. I could see the increasing need for agency staff and started to question why staffing was in that position in the first place, and the intrinsic link between investing in staff recruitment and retention and working and pay conditions. We could see ambulance services in uniforms for private firms, centralisation of services and closures of others. We could see the increase of 0-hour contracts and outsourcing of departments. Agency and 0 hours contracted staff have been on the increase whilst losing protection and their workers' rights in their workplace. Having support from councillors on these issues is integral to the investment and sustainability of the future of our NHS and provides an essential and vital voice for working class issues. It was hard to accept what was going on around us, and ultimately we've chosen not to accept it. The NHS needs people to fight for it. Free healthcare should be a right and should be free at the point of contact. Sheffield Socialist Party and Sheffield Save Our NHS have actively supported our wider actions in the campaign and in the streets and in the workplace locally. This has given us the confidence to push even harder. Many NHS workers have been missold to. The Labour Party and others are not representing our struggle. Having a councillor in local authority would give us confidence and support in our campaigns for fair pay, terms and conditions, PPE and safety at work. It would encourage us to become engaged in our trade unions and push them in the right direction to listen to the needs of the members. Engagement from the council and trade unions would ultimately benefit our working conditions as frontline workers. A TUSC councillor would be a voice to opposing cuts, privatisation and outsourcing our services. It would also mean a voice that would resist the post-COVID justification for austerity. TUSC would fight for a high-quality, free national health service under democratic public ownership and control. TUSC would support women's equality and rights within the workplace and advocate for full equality of LGBT workers in the NHS. We need a voice within local authority that will fight for low-waged workers. Half of NHS staff are on minimum wage. TUSC is the party for the working class and a socialist voice for the struggles that are more relevant than ever. TUSC has provided an actual alternative to pro-cuts and pro-establishment parties, and it is vital for trade unionists, campaigners and socialists to be part of it so we can build together for a fairer society. TUSC would be fighting for a fully funded, publicly owned socialist NHS, and I am extremely proud to be standing as a candidate as a step towards building a fairer society and to continue the fight to protect the NHS and be a voice for its workers. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Holly. And as I expected, that was a powerful condemnation of the conditions facing NHS workers, and good luck on Thursday as a candidate. Our second trade union speaker in this section is going to be Amy Murphy. Amy was elected 3 years ago as the president of USDOR, the Union for Shop Workers and Distributed and Allied Workers. And although she's speaking this evening in a personal capacity, USDOR is the fourth largest union affiliated to the Labour Party. But its members, whilst perhaps recognised as key workers, particularly in retail, suffer some of the lowest wages and poorest terms and conditions, even in household supermarket supermarkets which are household names. And I'm sure Amy's going to reflect on that in her contribution. So Amy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good evening, comrades. As Dave said, I'm Amy Murphy. Up until a couple of weeks ago, I was the president of USDOR. I sit on the TUSC steering committee, and I feel really privileged to do that. So my members in retail, we have seen job cuts, attacks on our terms and conditions. The pandemic has hit us hard. We got the status of key workers, and that's all it is. It's a word, doesn't mean anything. We have seen violence towards our members. We did a survey of nearly 3,000 members, and 88% of those said that they had been either verbally abused or physically abused in the time of the pandemic. 6% have been threatened by customers. And the supermarkets, so they give us this wonderful name of a key worker, but in reality, they don't pay us anywhere near what we should be paid. Many of our members are, even in the big four, so Sainsbury's, Co-op, Tesco's, Morrison's, are on just over £9 an hour. And every time there's a pay rise, in reality, it's not a pay rise because the caveats that go with it. So we lose our bonuses, we lose our bank holiday pay, Sunday working, more and more they're pushing again. We've pushed it back twice, and again it's coming again. Morrison's are already starting to open on Sundays, even though it's against the law. So we need a party that actually is going to stand up for the working class, and that includes my members. But again, if you look at the demise of the high street, the Conservatives are doing nothing to help that. We've had over 200,000 job losses already, and there's a lot more on the horizon, probably the same amount again. By the cutting of public services, i.e. bus routes, it's vital that we have bus routes into the centres to get people into the shops. Obviously with the pandemic, with the non-essential shops being closed, that's hit our industry hard. But on the flip side, we've got the bigger businesses, the supermarkets that are reaping in the profits since this pandemic on the back of their hard work of their workers that are putting themselves at risk to keep the country fed during this pandemic. And actually, all we get is abuse from customers for no better pay, and our terms and conditions are completely slashed at every turn. We've also got as with British Gas and British Airways, the fire and rehire come in again, almost sweeping through the businesses. No one is safe from fire and rehire, and it's having a real impact on jobs. and people's terms and conditions. And no one, you know, should have to put up with that. You know, this more for less is all they think about. And it's sweeping across this country. So again, we need opposition towards this. We can't, you know, once upon a time, many, many years ago, we could look at the Labour Party and they were the, you know, the working class party, but they're not anymore. Starmer, he's not interested in the working class. He's almost as bad as Johnson. Big business is all they're interested in, making sure that they're cozying up to the big businesses and making sure that their profits and their shareholders are satisfied, and the workers are at the bottom of the pile, which it needs to stop. And I truly believe that, you know, TUSC actually gives us a voice, a political voice. Obviously, when Corbyn was around, it was amazing. I can remember being in Durham and seeing the amount of young people standing up, chanting his name, fully behind him, and actually believed and actually politicised so many young people. And now these young people and people of all ages are now disillusioned completely with the Labour Party because they don't stand up for them. They mean nothing anymore. And because of that, you know, we need a party that's going to, where that fire was lit by Corbyn, and now it's disillusionment and it's turning into anger. So we need to have somewhere where these people can go. And I think they will turn to TUSC and the parties like the Socialist Party and, you know, to the left, because that's the only way forward. There is no way forward with Labour or the Conservatives. And, you know, trade unions need to play their part as well. We need to, you know, stand together, regardless of whether, you know, we're private or public sector, because as I've said, you know, we all need to fight for better paid jobs, for better services. Any cuts should be pushed back because at the end of the day, we're all going to suffer through that. And, you know, as I said, we need to stop this fire and rehire. We've heard about, you know, the attacks on you know, the right to protest. Again, you know, it's just everything they can do to put the working class down, to stifle their voice. And we need TUSC to give us a political voice, someone that relates to the working people, relates to the working class, understands that their needs, i.e. social housing, the need to end to austerity and end to cuts. And they need to engage with the public, massively engage with the public, which both the main parties, in my eyes, don't do anymore at all. So we need these councillors to stand up and actually be the voice of the working class. And I truly believe that TUSC can do that. I every time I see TUSC candidates speaking, I just actually get fully empowered again, because you know, when you listen to what they're standing for, you look at the manifesto and you just watch that broadcast. It's a shame it is only on YouTube, but what a fantastic broadcast. And we can only get stronger. And, you know, 330 candidates on Thursday, who knows what we're going to go forward. But I would urge everyone to vote TUSC on Thursday and let's build for a working party and make a difference, because enough is enough and it's been far too long. And now's the time, if ever. So, you know, my absolute solidarity to every single candidate in TUSC on Thursday. And thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Amy. And as Amy said, Jeremy did inspire people when he became Labour leader in September 2015. But the record of Labour in the last 13 months has been Keir Starmer's disillusionment of all those activists who joined Labour. And we do need a new party. And after Amy's term of office as president of USDOR came to an end at the end of last month, we hope that she's going to stay on the steering committee and help us build that new alternative. Thanks very much for that contribution, Amy. The last speaker in this section of trade union speakers is going to be Joe Simpson. Joe is the Deputy General Secretary of the Prison Officers Association, a long-term supporter of TUSC, indeed a member of the steering committee and a long-term advocate for for a new workers' party and a fighter for workers' safety. And even though his terms and conditions in his employment with the prison service mean that it's illegal for prison workers to take strike action, that hasn't stopped the POA from walkouts over the failure of governments to make prisons safe. And so we welcome Joe, who will now have his 5 minutes to address us at tonight's TUSC rally. And this is the first time I've had to say this tonight, but you've got to unmute yourself, Joe. No. Can technical support make sure there's an invite to unmute? Let's see if I can help out. Here we go. I'm asking you to unmute, Joe. Can you see that? There we go. No? We were nearly there. No? Well, I tell you what, let's move on to another speaker, Joe. What I suggest, before I retired, I was somewhat of an IT professional, is that you turn it off and turn it back on again. And we'll have you back in a couple of minutes after we've taken some more candidates who we have with us tonight. And hopefully Deji is going to be ready to pick up that baton that Joe wasn't able to. Deji is a Black Lives Matter activist and a candidate in London on the London Assembly list that we have. And I'm looking now to see if Deji's there. He is. Can you unmute yourself, Deji? Excellent. Yeah, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Last summer, the Black Lives Matter movement saw huge marches and protests erupt across the UK as young working class people from all races and backgrounds poured onto the streets. And they were determined to put an end to racism and police brutality in the UK, but they were fighting for even more. They were fighting to stop poverty, child hunger, homelessness, but also to fight for a different kind of society. But it's clear that Starmer's Labour aren't supporting this fight. It's fallen on people like Marcus Rashford to lead the opposition against the Tories. Labour councillors are crushing working people with the same cuts and the same council tax rises and transport cost increases that the Tories would. They've shut down community centres and libraries, leaving young people with no place to go. And they've ripped apart communities so that their developer mates can profit from unaffordable flats and gentrification. And all of this has happened at the same time that they've failed to build quality council housing and have cut corners on safety, which is exactly what led to the horror of the Grenfell Tower tragedy. And as they've done this, it's allowed right-wing voices like Priti Patel and Nigel Farage to attack migrants and to blame them for the problems that we see today. And all of this, despite the fact that the BLM movement showed that there is mass support to attack racism and mass support for all those who are fighting against it. And while the Tories have released bad race reports in the past, they would have faced hell for this one if Jeremy Corbyn was still the leader of the opposition. And that's because he would have openly attacked its lies and opened people's eyes to the truth of the situation in a country where young black workers are 3 times as likely to be jobless, with 40% of us unemployed because of the COVID pandemic. But instead, we've seen politicians proposing to buy British bombs and weapons to boost the economy. And weeks after the murder of Sarah Everard, they were calling for more police on the street to tackle antisocial behaviour. But this isn't coming from the Tories; it's coming from Keir Starmer. From the Ford inquiry report to the leaflets attacking travellers, it's clear that These aren't accidental blunders, but a sign that the Labour Party isn't going to fight for oppressed groups anymore. They've shown that they're trying to be a welcome home to Tories and a welcome home to reactionary ideas. Just like it's a welcome home to the racist Labour Party officials that bullied Diane Abbott. And they do this because they think that Black people have no one else to vote for, that left-wing people will just fall in line and vote for Labour, but we can't afford to do that. Instead, we've got to vote for TUSC in the elections. We need socialist voices in politics to be a real opposition to austerity, to oppression and to cuts, and to provide an alternative that unites workers from all communities. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Deji, for stepping to the breach there and the quality of the contribution that was made. That was great. Thanks. Do we have Joe back again? I'm looking for a sign. Ah, Joe.
Right. Hopefully, I've
Excellent.
done it.
I'm not going to do the introduction again, mate. The floor's yours.
Thanks very much. Sorry about that. It's my technical ability as well and my sausage fingers. Dave, thanks very much. And it's been good listening to some of the debates. In fact, I've been having a debate on Twitter with somebody from the Labour Party who was actually one of their strategists. And once I've been asking him about policies for the Labour Party, he bullet pointed 4 policies. Now, I can't remember anything that were coming in. And one of the things that he was talking about was the Labour Party committing to a 2.5% pay rise for my colleagues in the in NHS. I've recently had a health problem. I've been in hospital. It's no secret. I had to have my right eye removed due to cancer, and I spent some time in Sheffield Hospital there, and seeing all the work that was going on in there during a pandemic. And you know, my members in the prison service have had exactly the same problems. Lack of PPE, lack of support, and also the lack of recognition that's going on. But I just wanted to say this: my hat goes off to the people who work within our hospitals and within our NHS, because without your work, without your dedication, and without your professionalism, we wouldn't have got through this pandemic. And do you deserve a 12.5% pay rise? From me, yes, and double again for the work that I saw. So from me, thank you very much on that. Then we go to TUSC candidates. I was a TUSC candidate in 2010 and in 2015, and I saw the work that goes into it, and I see the work that goes on Twitter. And the reason why I've been having a debate on Twitter with the Labour Party strategist is because I am still a Labour Party member. And he couldn't believe that I was tweeting TUSC. And he didn't like the answer when I turned around and said to him, well, we're supposed to be a socialist party, yet the only thing that I'm hearing socialist content coming from is the TUSC candidate. So, and then I was threatened with the party rules, which made me laugh quite a bit, because he was saying that under the party rules that I am not allowed to do that. Well, that's funny. Hasn't Keir Starmer been doing exactly the same with the Tories, agreeing with the Conservative Party rhetoric that keeps coming out? I live in a dream world, and I hope that Jeremy's going to come back and save the Labour Party, but I don't think he will. And I want to just say something that Pete McLaren has said, that individual socialists can join TUSC. Pete, I'll be giving you a shout after the meeting to do that. because I feel more and more disillusioned with where Labour's gone, because we were promised a ministry of Labour. That ain't going to happen. We were told that we were going to have the pension age re-looked at and reduced, something that we were going for. But really, we're going to be talking about the regional elections, and yeah, it's quite right that the only socialist voice that's going to be heard is TUSC. And yeah, like I said, I did stand. Did I get anywhere? No, I didn't, but I was there. And listening to some of the contributions as well from colleagues in the meeting, I think I'll be standing in the next ones if TUSC will have me as a TUSC member, because I think that's where we need to have the fight back. So we look at that, and we look at who is representing us. Well, nobody's representing us at the moment, and nobody from the Tory party, and nobody from the Labour Party. But I would just say this: why did the Labour Party fight against Jeremy Corbyn? I'll just say this on ending it, Dave, because I know there'll be other people who want to come in. The reason why they fought against Jeremy Corbyn was not only did they not like the policies that were being put forward, they were too bone idle to do the work in order to get them up and running. And we lost quite a good few socialist MPs because of the dithering that we had over Brexit. And that was something else. And everybody looks towards Hartlepool, and everybody's saying that, you know, the left will rejoice when Labour loses in Hartlepool. I won't, because the only people that are going to suffer in that are the good, hard-working people and working class in Hartlepool. They're going to suffer it, and we haven't seen the depth of cuts that are going to come along once June 21st arrives, because I'll tell you now, that is when they're going to say the pandemic is over. No, we've got a lot of work to do, and I'll be part of that, Dave. So the next set of elections, hopefully you will be seeing my name next to it, and hopefully getting an X put in the box next to it. So to everybody who's standing, I wish you all the luck in the world. And it doesn't, it's not hard for me to say, everybody who I speak to, I tell them to vote for TUSC, which includes my family. Solidarity to everybody. Thanks very much for listening to me. And I wish you all the best for the future, and I will be there for the future. Thanks very much, Dave.
Well, thanks very much, Joe. Thanks for coping with the technical problems in being with us. And when you say you're still a Labour Party member, but yes, only TUSC was putting forward socialist policies, we could point out the fact that Alistair Campbell is still a Labour Party member, and he voted Lib Dem in December 2019. But if you're going to get in touch with Pete McLaren about formally joining TUSC, probably it's only a matter of time. One last point, by the way, is that you mentioned Hartlepool, and we did invite Thelma Walker, who's the former Labour MP for Colne Valley, who's standing in the Hartlepool by-election as an independent with the support of the Northern Independence Party. But regretfully, the pressure of the campaign in the last 72 hours meant that she hasn't been able to join us this evening. But if we move a little bit further north from Hartlepool, we've mentioned some of the council seats and areas that TUSC is standing in England, but we're also standing across the list system for the Welsh Senedd, and we've also got candidates standing in Scotland. Our next couple of speakers are from Scotland and from Wales, and in the chat earlier on, we did put links to the separate policies that TUSC is putting forward in England, in Scotland, and in Wales. And we welcome now Sean Robertson, who again is an NHS worker and a GMB steward, and is the lead candidate on the Highlands and Islands Scottish Parliament regional list. Sean, the floor is yours.
Good evening, comrades. I'm delighted to bring solidarity greetings to this fantastic TUSC election rally from Scottish TUSC. In Scotland, it is our parliamentary election on Thursday. Scottish TUSC is standing in 3 regional lists and 3 parliamentary constituencies. And we are the only pro-independent socialist standing in this election, with the others, such as the SSP, vacating the field and putting the struggle on pause without explanation. Yet it is vitally important that the working class are represented, particularly at this extraordinary time of capitalist crisis, precipitated by the pandemic and decades of austerity. In all, we are offering 1.5 million people the chance to vote Socialist. Our candidates are working class fighters. We are standing trade union leaders who helped lead the equal pay strike in Glasgow, young workers and students, and anti-austerity campaigners. The backdrop to this election in Scotland is the incredible impact of the COVID pandemic. To date, more than 10,000 people have been killed here. While to people in other parts of the UK, the SNP government may appear to have handled the crisis better than Johnson, and that's not really a high bar, is it? The same mistakes were made here. In fact, for much of the pandemic, Sturgeon and the SNP have been in lockstep with the Tories. And SNP's austerity over the last decade has meant that there was inadequate PPE and resources in the NHS and care sectors, and that was a problem that they didn't get to grips with. And we had a similar debacle over test and trace. Plus, in care homes, there was a catastrophe worsened by the Scottish Government's decision to send untested patients and even dozens of patients who had tested positive back to care homes, risking the lives of the most vulnerable, all because our public services couldn't cope due to decades of austerity overseen by the SNP. So the pandemic exposed all that's rotten about capitalism. We are fighting to change that rotten system for a socialist recovery for the working class. Our core message is that we need pay rises, jobs and homes to tackle the inequalities caused by the pandemic. And we make no apologies for saying that we will pay for it by taking the wealth off the 1%. The last year has shown, when you look at the massive, obscene profits that companies like Amazon have made, that there is more than enough wealth in society to guarantee everyone a decent standard of living, and we refuse to go back to cuts and austerity. So we demand a £12 an hour minimum wage as a step towards 15, a 15% pay rise for NHS and care workers to reflect their key worker status and tackle the chronic understaffing faced by these sectors. And we demand £2,000 for council workers. And we've seen with the working class flexing its muscles that the unions have just massively rejected the 2% pay offer from councils in Scotland. We fight for public ownership with workers' control and socialist planning to offer a route out of the economic, social and health disaster we are living through. And the right to IndyRef too is a big factor in this election up in Scotland. There is clearly going to be a majority in the new parliament for the right to another referendum, with the SNP, the Scottish Greens and possibly a third pro-Indy party, ALBA, gaining seats. But all of these parties stand for a capitalist Scotland. They defend the same market system that delivered the biggest economic crisis since the 1930s. However, the working class and young people who back independence want a complete break from these ruinous policies. Simply changing the union flag for the saltire won't satisfy their demands. That's why Scottish TUSC calls for an independent socialist Scotland with democratic public ownership under working class control at its core. We would bring oil and gas into public ownership as well as banks and big industry to begin tackling the inequity so evident in Scotland. Furthermore, the SNP have no plan B. If Boris Johnson and the Supreme Court block IndyRef 2, that's the end of the road. But we do. We say build a mass movement involving trade unions, workers and young people to defeat them, including using strikes, demonstrations and occupations if necessary to guarantee workers in Scotland's democratic rights are upheld. And we would link this struggle to the fight for a socialist recovery for the working class. These policies are anathema to the SNP leadership. They have a mortal fear of mobilising the working class. They are afraid that they will turn on them for their role as the axemen of the capitalist cuts. Above all, we are standing to put socialism on the agenda for a new mass working class party to be built, to fight for, yes, an independent socialist Scotland, but also for a united struggle of the working class across Scotland, England, Wales, and across Ireland, north and south as well. As we have said in the 1.1 million leaflets that we have distributed to every house and areas we are standing in, COVID has exposed all that is rotten about capitalism. We say no to more cuts and no to capitalism. We demand a socialist recovery for the working class based on public ownership of the economy. Only socialism can vaccinate the working class from the iniquity and misery inflicted upon us by the ruling class. TUSC is the only option for socialists in Scotland on May the 6th. Thank you. Thank you, comrades. And can I just say as well that we've got our pre-election rallies being held tomorrow. So if you look on Facebook, our Facebook page, you'll get the link for that if you want to come along. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Sean. And let's just repeat that point. On social media, on Facebook, there is the TUSC Coalition, there is TUSC Scotland and TUSC Wales, 3 Facebook pages. There are also 3 Twitter accounts where you can get up-to-date information about the campaign, such as the tremendous 1.1 million leaflets that the comrades in Scotland have distributed. So thanks for that contribution from Sean. And let's now turn to TUSC Wales. And our speaker from TUSC Wales is Mark Evans. Mark is speaking in a personal capacity, but is a member of Unison's local government service group executive. He's the lead candidate on the South Wales West Senedd regional list. And Mark, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Solidarity from TUSC Wales. Now, Boris Johnson, whether he said it or not, that he would let the bodies pile high, that is the reality during the pandemic. But there are also many, many unnecessary deaths in Wales due to the Labour Welsh Government handling the pandemic, which I don't have time to go into here. And their handling the pandemic, again, can only be looked on favourably if compared with the Tories. Instead of fighting Tory austerity previously, the Welsh Government, Labour and Plaid councils saw their role as passing on devastating Tory cuts. Instead of preparing public services to protect the population from a pandemic they knew was coming, they passed on cuts since 2010 that have debilitated council services and the NHS. And then they expected public services to be able to combat the virus. I would say that equates with starving a runner for a week and then expecting them to run a marathon. Councils since 2010 in Wales have lost approximately 2 billion from their budgets, and the cuts to the NHS led to the fact that the NHS in Wales had the lowest number of intensive beds in Northern Europe. Unfortunately and predictably, Labour and Plaid in Wales have aided and abetted the Tories by doing their dirty work. All have acted in the interests of big business in the Senedd, either voting for or abstaining on the Sennedd's budget, or implemented cuts when in control of councils. During this election, all the establishment parties, particularly Labour and Plaid, have been promising a land of milk and honey in Wales, funny enough, in the future. But we should judge them not just by what they promise for tomorrow, but what they do in action now. And as I said, clearly we cannot, and the public, working class people, cannot trust the establishment parties without future because they're making massive cuts now. And that is because they accept capitalism and all that goes with it. Labour Welsh Government, Welsh Government have been in power for over 20 years in the Senedd. If they ever want to see, and they would claim probably until Keir Starmer came along, to be the left of Keir Starmer. In fact, Mark Drakeford, the leader, said he was a Corbynista. But they have failed on any kind of measure, particularly poverty, etc., to reduce poverty. Now, TUSC candidates are the only candidates that put forward a social alternative to the capitalist misery and a strategy to defeat cuts. And we call on the Senedd and Welsh Government to set a needs-led, no-cuts budget in consultation with the trade unions and working class communities in Wales that would meet the needs of those communities and of workers in council. And we'd also demand the return of all money stolen from the Welsh Government's budget since 2010. And after all, that's small money compared to what the Tories have splashed out on their rich friends during the pandemic. While, of course, it's very likely initially the Tories would refuse this, we would then call on the Welsh Government to use its borrowing powers and reserves to fill that gap while building a mass campaign to get the money back off the Tories. In other words, following the Liverpool Road in the 1980s, and you can imagine the potential for if the Welsh Government were to take that on. Instead of disillusioning people with promises, they would be leading that struggle to get those monies back. And that struggle would, I think, inevitably spread to England and to Scotland. That would have the potential not only to stop Tory cuts, but be the beginning of the end of the Tories. So thanks, Comrades, for allowing me to speak. TUSC, onward and upward, and to the building of a mass workers' party of socialist policies. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark and Sean before. And both TUSC Wales and TUSC Scotland have separate manifestos in these elections because they're standing for an assembly and a senedd and a parliament. And we've put links in the chat where you can go and find out more about the policies on which the comrades are fighting. And our next speaker, we've only got a couple more to go. Our next speaker is also standing for a large area. Nancy Taff is the lead candidate for the Greater London Assembly, the GLA, but she's also standing in North East London as a constituency candidate for the Assembly as well. And under the theme of the need for socialists in City Hall, we give the floor to Nancy.
Okay, comrades. Well, I don't want to sound too Eurovision, but greetings from London. You'll be pleased to know that I've cut my contribution because I don't want to repeat the ideas already fantastically expressed. But it feels like the whole world agrees that London is undergoing a massive change. Some call it an existential change. Now, I've stood at tube stations in this election campaign, giving out leaflets at stations where I've always stood and given out leaflets, where prior to the pandemic, people would be queuing to get into the tube. Sometimes there's been so many people that they've had to close stations. In this election, they're like ghost stations, just a trickle of people. Similarly, I've stood in Walthamstow Market this week outside Lidl, which would normally be empty on a weekday, but now is bustling with people every day, just walking up and down for something to do. People who have no jobs and nowhere to go. Something has changed. Primarily, I think a realisation amongst the working class that they exist and nothing works in this city unless they work. The pandemic has taught us this, and now they're feeling left out and let down. And that's why we're offering a socialist answer to the crisis facing the city. We stepped forward and put bold socialist policies. We've assembled 25 fighters from across London to put on the list. We're standing 2 candidates in the constituencies and numerous council by-elections we're challenging. Every candidate has a leaflet which they've penned themselves, addressed to their base. We went to our base in the working class in London. We spoke to our base, or the base that we aim to build. We tied our pink banners to lampposts and railings and boldly proclaimed TUSC as a voice for the working class. And the Labour right wing in London are worried. Now, I'm in no doubt that they're going to win, but they are worried about what this election could reveal. Khan is now talking about people lending him their vote. He's on TV talking about how a low turnout will work against him, and people must turn out and vote, chiding people not to vote for the smaller parties. The right-wing establishment may not fear us, but they have reason to fear this election and what it could reveal in London. The first cracks in the Blairite Labour's domination in the city could emerge, cracks that a new Workers' Party could grow in the battles ahead. The working class still needs its own party. There was no possibility of us sitting this one out. Solidarity and good luck to all the candidates standing and roll on the local elections in London 2022.
Thanks ever so much, Nancy, for that contribution. As I say, Nancy is the lead candidate in the GLA list, where we have a full list of candidates across London as a whole. Our last speaker this evening is one of our two mayoral candidates. We're standing in Bristol and in Liverpool. And those of you with better eyesight than perhaps others may have noticed I'm wearing a badge this evening with the number 47 on it. It's a badge I've worn for many years in solidarity with the 47 socialist councillors in Liverpool who in the mid-1980s took on Thatcher with a much bigger parliamentary majority than Boris Johnson has got. And Boris Johnson's no Margaret Thatcher, by the way, and beat them and won money for the city and showed, as Chris said earlier on, a model of how councils could resist cuts. And our candidate for the Liverpool mayoral election, Roger Bannister, is our final speaker this evening. Roger.
Thanks, Dave. Last week I had an unexpected pleasure as a result of my campaigning and standing for the Liverpool mayor. I was invited to invite Mr. Max Caller along with the other mayoral candidates. Now, Max Caller's got a history, he's got previous. In fact, he, as far as Liverpool's concerned, he is the guy that has recommended to the Tory government that they appoint commissioners to take over important functions of the city. And when I met him with the other candidates, none of the others said much, by the way, but I reminded him of when our paths had crossed in the past, when as chief executive of Hackney Council 20 odd years ago now, he imposed massive cuts, provoked a strike of Unionist members, and that I spoke at a meeting in support of those strikers. And he said he remembered it, and he remembered it fondly. I think he was joking. I don't think he remembered it very fondly, because my memory was that one of the strikers actually leapt out the crowd and tried to strangle him and had to be torn off by stewards. But I told Max Caller that I was standing in the election in order to oppose the very policies that he had imposed in Hackney, and also that alone amongst the mayoral candidates this year, I am the only candidate that actually is in opposition to the commissioners. If elected, will do my utmost to get them out of the city, to restore democracy, and to allow the working people of Liverpool to decide what happens to their council. Now, it is true that under Labour, Liverpool is in a mess. We have got police involvement in municipal affairs. We've got the mayor, Joe Anderson, facing allegations of corruption and witness intimidation. We've got a situation where Keir Starmer won't allow Labour Party members in Liverpool to freely elect their own candidate. They've been through process after process that's been abandoned and derailed. And in the end, as if to show how the new candidate is to be a break with everything in the past, they've chosen one called Joanne Anderson, who we are told is no relation. You couldn't make it up if you were writing a book. The campaigning's been going well. We've had comrades up from London. We've had comrades up from the West Midlands and other parts as well, and that's been greatly appreciated. We have 4 comrades standing in seats in Liverpool. We've got a couple of comrades standing in council seats in Knowsley, and we've got a candidate standing in St Helens. So we're spread as far as we can be across the boroughs of Merseyside despite our relatively low numbers at this moment in time. We're getting a good response. Most people haven't heard of us and are glad to hear that there is a party like TUSC in the election. And we're getting responses elsewhere. This morning, I got an email from a shop steward, a Unite shop steward in the private sector, but he said, and I'll quote, "All our members are in full support. You have their votes." So there's obviously that feeling out there amongst the working class. When they hear about TUSC, they're pleased about it and are prepared to commit to it. Our message is clear, and we've only got 2 more days now to campaign, 2 more days to get our message across. But the message is, firstly, no to cuts. Secondly, organise to fight. Thirdly, implement socialist policies. That's the basis of why we're standing across all these elections, as far as I'm concerned. But I think it's more than the message of politics in that sense, because it's also to disillusioned workers, to workers who are worried about their jobs, to workers who've lost thousands of pounds during the COVID crisis because they've been furloughed, etc. It's a message of hope. It's a message that says to working class people, things can change, and they can change for the better. And you can accelerate that change by voting TUSC on the 6th of May. Thanks, comrades.
Well, thanks very much, Roger, who is the final speaker to bring this evening's election rally to a close. We've kept a close eye on the attendance and the numbers coming in 1 or 2 cases for various personal reasons having to leave early. We went over 500 attending this evening, and another 100 or so who had registered and sent therefore their support, which I think has been an excellent turnout given the resources that we have in this election. And I want to particularly, I want to thank everybody, those of you who've come tonight, those of you who are candidates, those of you who are working in the areas, walking the streets, delivering the leaflets. It's been a strange election, particularly given that we don't have the opportunity yet to do the sort of canvassing and proper discussions with working class people that we've done in elections in the past, but it's been excellent. But I do particularly want to thank, in closing the rally tonight, the technical team behind tonight's success, and that's Thea Everett and Katie Simpson, who have been stalwarts in the social media and the work on the broadcast, and Lenny Shale, who's been the technical host this evening. Thanks to those comrades for their work and to everyone else involved. Now, tonight's election rally was our pitch, not just for your votes on Thursday, but for more. If we're going to get change in this country, frankly, it needs a new party. It needs a new mass party, one that's rooted in the organisations and the communities of the working class. Working class people have been forced to pay the price for the last crisis, the financial crisis of 2008, after the gambling and speculation of the banks and the financial system. And we've had a decade of austerity, whilst various governments have placed the price for rescuing the banking system on the shoulders of working people. We've lost thousands and thousands and thousands of local jobs. Perhaps as many as 750,000 council jobs have gone in the last 12 years. We've lost hundreds and hundreds of libraries, youth and community centres. Public sector workers have had wage cuts. We've heard this evening how NHS workers and council workers, just to name 2 sectors, have had effectively 20% real term cuts in their wages over the last decade or so. And it doesn't have to be that way. This is a rich country. Chris said it in his contribution right at the beginning, the 5th largest economy on the planet. 1 billionaire in Britain, who actually, I don't think he actually lives in Britain anymore. I think he's a tax exile. But anyway, James Ratcliffe, the richest person in Britain. Let's see in the Sunday Times rich list in about 10 days' time whether he still has that place. But he's likely he will have, because his wealth in the last 12 months has risen by over £5 billion. One person's wealth has gone up by more than £5 billion in the last 12 months. That alone would be enough to pay for every single NHS worker the 15% of the NHS campaign. So it's not that we're a poor country. We can't afford, it's not that we can't afford decent services and facilities for ordinary people. We're a rich country. It's just that the wealth in this country is in the wrong hands. Now, we need change. But as I say, change is going to need a new working class party. In the words of Shelley, it's going to need one for the many, not the few. So I urge you tonight, not just to vote for us on Thursday, but to join TUSC. Go to www.tusk.org.uk, and I think that link is probably in the chat as well, and sign up to join or to support TUSC, because the work won't be done when the results come out on Friday. We hope to get thousands of votes. We hope to get tens of thousands of votes, but we still have to reach a much larger section of working people, including those who voted for other parties in the past. And it's worth just making the point, by the way, that in the election of 2017, Jeremy Corbyn put an extra 3.5 million people on Labour's votes by the radical socialist policies he put forward. The biggest climb in Labour's votes since Clanackley in 1945. 1 million of that 3.5 million extra votes came from people who'd previously voted UKIP. It just makes the point, you don't have to wrap yourself in a Union Jack to win back people who voted for other parties. Radical socialist policies can do that. And we will continue to be that radical socialist alternative in these elections and beyond by stepping up our social media work, our anti-austerity campaigns, increasingly as we're able to do so on the streets, by developing more supporters in the trade unions and by establishing and building local support as well. And you can help that. Please vote for us if you've got a candidate on Thursday, May the 6th. Share the video that you've seen tonight on YouTube. Join us at that link, which is in the chat, and then perhaps we can stand even more widely in the elections to come. Thanks ever so much for attending tonight, and safe journey home.